Clear to play.
This is Matthew from Mini Wargaming, and this is another video in the series of how to play Warhammer 40k 6th edition. Today we're going to cover a few extras from the shooting phase, namely blasts, templates, and snapshots. So let's take a look at this Space Marine Tactical Squad. This squad is not like the one that you saw in our first videos, where it was just a bunch of bolt guns and the sergeant had a bolt pistol. We have a couple special weapons in here. Now, most of them are still armed with their bolt guns. We got 1, 2, 3, 4 bolt guns, and the sergeant has his close combat weapon and his bolt pistols. But now we have a tactical marine armed with a flamer and one armed with a missile launcher. These have different profiles from the bolt gun and are actually fired in a different manner than most weapons out there. That is because they use what we call the templates. We have the regular flame template, and we have a blast template. Now there are two blast templates. There are a small one and there is a large one. The large one is not typically used by infantry. It'll be more used by weapons that are much larger, such as those on vehicles, or perhaps psychic powers or other things like that. So most of the time we'll use this one. The way that these weapons are fired, first off, you have to understand that they still have to target the same squad that the rest of the Space Marines target. So for example, in the shooting phase, this unit decides to fire. Once it decides to fire, it chooses its target, and everything has to fire against it. And because these are different weapon profiles, we have to fire them separately. Now, it's the best choice to fire your template weapons before your other weapons. And the reason for that is you don't want to remove casualties with your bolt guns that could have been covered by a blast weapon, which you'll see what I mean with that in just a second. So let's start off with the flamer. The way that you fire a flamer is you take the flame template and you put the small end touching the base of the model, and you put the large end pretty much wherever you want, as long as it's covering the enemy models that are in the target squad, and as long as it doesn't touch your own models. That is why you want flamers usually out front. If this flamer was right here, he'd have a very hard time, because when you put your flame template, you're going to cover your own guys, which is not allowed. So you really want these guys to be out front. So we place it down, and then we look over top, and we count the number of models that are covered. So let's see how many we can get here. Looks like the most that we're going to be able to cover is 5. So with the flamer, unlike other weapons, it automatically hits. So those 5 models are just hit. We don't have to roll to see if they get hit. So we take 5 dice, and the rest of it is just like the regular shooting phase. The flamer has a strength of 4 and an armor penetration of 5, just like bolt guns in fact. And so it rolls 3s to wound, and so we made 4 wounds, and it ignores their 6+ armor. In addition to that, the flamer also always ignores cover. So if there was some sort of barricade in front, let's put that barricade in front for the rest of the shooting phase. This flamer actually ignores it completely. It's the only type of weapon that does. Any weapon that uses this template ignores cover. So we've inflicted 4 wounds. Now, when we remove the 4 casualties, we do it like regular shooting. We don't remove it from under the flame template. So we still go with the nearest one. So 1, 2, 3. We'll say that one's the closest. But we're not done our shooting yet. Next, we'll have the missile launcher shoot. This is all part of the same shooting, so we have to finish all this before we move on to the next squad. So missile launcher shoots by using a small blast template. The way that you fire anything that uses the blast special rule is you place the blast template directly over a model from the target unit that you're firing at. The center needs to be within the range of the weapon. In this case, it's very long, it's 48 inches, and so there's not going to be any problem in getting this within range. Once it is placed over top, we roll to see how far it scatters. This is where you use the special scatter die that Games Workshop provides. The scatter die has 4 sides with arrows, and then 2 sides with a target. The target means a direct hit. Otherwise, the arrow will tell you which way it scatters. Whenever you roll the scatter, you take the scatter die plus 2d6, and putting it as close to the blast template as possible, you roll to see what happens. Now here we managed to get a direct hit, which means the blast is going to stay exactly where it is. But let's assume that we had rolled an arrow. well then it's going to deviate or scatter 5 inches. Now it doesn't actually scatter that full distance because the gunner has a good skill, a ballistic skill of 4 in fact. So you reduce the scatter distance by the ballistic skill of the firer. So in this case his ballistic skill is 4, so this 5 is reduced to 1. So it only scatters 1 inch. You got to be careful to line it up with the same direction of the arrow. That's why we roll nice and close, otherwise you can get this a little off. You move the blast, and then you count how many models are underneath it. In this case, it's 3. Then, now that we've calculated there are 3 hits, we roll the wound and armor as normal. Once again, this missile launcher is strength 4, armor penetration of 5. Just coincidentally happens to be the same as bolt guns and the flamer. So we've got 3 dice. We're going to roll 3s to wound. And we manage all 3 to wound. But now we're going to look at the closest, and we see that there is going to be cover. But we're going to cover cover in another video because it can get complicated. So we got 3 wounds here. 1, 2, 3. But we're still not done because now the bolt guns get to fire, and the bolt pistol too. So once again, just like we learned in the last video, we measure to see how many are within the 12-inch range. In this case, it's going to be all of them. So the bolt guns will have 2 shots each. So 2, 4, 6, 8. And 1 shot from the sergeant. So that's 9 shots in total. So they hit on 3s. So 2 of those missed. And they wound on 3s. Remember, you can always look this up on the chart in the 40k rulebook. And they manage 5 wounds. And then they have a 6+ armor save, but they have an armor penetration of 5, which ignores that. So 5 more die. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can see the cultists took some very heavy casualties just by adding in a flamer and a missile launcher. The last thing we're going to talk about is snapshots. Snapshots are made whenever a squad is distracted, or they're firing a weapon that's not supposed to be fired if they move, or for some other reasons as well. But basically what it means is when you fire, your ballistic skill is reduced to 1. We already covered a bit of snapshotting in the assault video where we talked about Overwatch. When a squad is charged, it can do an Overwatch fire, which is done as snapshots. But with templates, it acts a little differently. So I want to talk about the various ways that snapshotting in Overwatch affects weapons like the missile launcher and like the flamer. Basically any weapons that use the blast or that use the flame template. Now, one reason that you might have to do a snapshot is if the weapon is marked as heavy and you moved. The missile launcher is marked as heavy. The flamer is an assault weapon. The bolt guns are rapid fire. The bolt pistol is a pistol. And the missile launcher is heavy. You don't have to remember that because it is in your codex and it is in the rule book. So you can always look it up if you're not quite sure. But we know that rapid fire weapons, if you can move and you can fire as normal. A bolt pistol, you can move and fire as normal. And even a flamer, if you move, you can fire it as a flamer. But a missile launcher, because it is marked as heavy, if you move a heavy weapon, then it has to be snapshotted. In other words, your ballistic skill is reduced to 1. But there's also another restriction. Weapons that use the blast cannot be snapshot, which means the missile launcher can't fire in its normal mode if it moves. Luckily, the missile launcher has a secondary mode, which is called a crack missile, in which case the strength is 8 and the armor penetration is 3, but it does not blast. So if this squad were to move, actually it doesn't matter if the squad moves, it only matters if the missile launcher moves. So you can declare that he's standing still with the rest of the moving. But let's say he did move. All of a sudden, he can't fire it as a blast. Now, not every blast weapon has a secondary fire, but the missile launcher that the Space Marines have happens to have that. So if he decides he wants to fire, he gets 1 single shot, strength 8. It is not a blast, so he has to roll to see if he hits, and he needs to roll a 6 instead of a 3+, even though the rest of his guys are still going to be hitting on 3+. So that is the first instance where you might be doing a snapshot. Another place where you might be doing a snapshot is in Overwatch. So let's say that the squad of cultists, it's the Chaos turn, and they declare an assault. Well, you say, we're going to Overwatch. Now, Overwatch is actually going to affect these 2 weapons in very different ways. First off, anything that has the flame template is actually very good on Overwatch. Because what it actually does is they call it the wall of flame. And that is that it just starts firing and it hits D3 models automatically when it comes in. If you think about it, that is huge. Everything else is hitting on 6s, which means they hit 1 out of 6 times. But something that uses a flame template hits D3 times. Effectively, if we do the math, making it 6 to 18 times as effective as another weapon on Overwatch. So when these guys charge in, rather than placing the flame template down, I simply roll a D3, which is a D6 divided by 2, rounded up. And in this case, that'll be a 1. And he'll automatically score 1 hit. We still roll for everybody else. But because the missile launcher is a blast weapon, it can't be fired as a snapshot, which means it won't be able to be fired on Overwatch in the regular mode. However, because this one happens to have a secondary mode, it could fire the strength 8 shot hitting on 6s, and these guys would roll their regular shots hitting on 6s as well. So those are the two main ways that you'll see snapshots happening. Snapshots also happen when you fail your leadership and you're falling back and you want to fire, but Space Marines don't have as much of a problem with that. But you will find other areas where snapshots do occur, especially when firing at flyers or if from a vehicle that's moved too far, or there are a lot of other occasions as well. You can look in the 40k rulebook to see what they are. So remember, blast weapons cannot be fired as snapshots. Flamers normally can't be fired as snapshots unless you are assaulted, in which case, Overwatch, they automatically hit D3 times. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any more questions about what we've talked about in this video or anything else about 40k, go ahead and post them below and we'll try to do a video for you. And happy wargaming.